Hello and welcome to Providence Perspectives. I'm your host, Dalia Palchik. In this series, we're exploring the people, places, and stories that have shaped the Providence District into the vibrant, diverse community it is today. Today's episode is especially meaningful to me. As a former teacher and a former Fairfax County School Board member and student, I've seen firsthand how education can open doors, transform lives, and strengthen communities. Here in Providence, our schools reflect our district's deep history and evolving commitment to equity, inclusion, and opportunity. Each chapter of our educational story reminds us how far we've come and how far we still want to go. Join me as we take a closer look at the legacy of education in Providence, the challenges we've faced, the progress we've made, and the bright future we're going to build together.
Back in the early 1900s, this wasn't your main job being a student. Your main job was to help your family, whether it was a farm or a business, whatever it was. I mean, you were lucky to come to school, and sometimes you had to walk 5 miles to come to school. And you couldn't come every day because things were going on. Where, you know, if you look at our community now and education now and how education is the priority and you're expected to go to school every day, and you're expected to do well, and there's homework, and I mean, it's a hard job. So it's very different from when it was in the 1900s. The classroom was multi-grade, so the teacher had a lot of responsibility to teach multiple grades, and she also was held to some pretty strict rules, especially if you're a woman. The clothing you could wear, it couldn't be bright colored. Your petticoat couldn't be any longer than 2 inches above your ankle. You couldn't date. You couldn't go out in town, or you had to be home by 8 p.m. at night, every night. So a lot of rules for them. So the first teacher at the Oakton Schoolhouse back in the mid-1800s was Miss Mary Holland Bell. And she, in the day, you weren't allowed, it was illegal to actually teach black children to read or write. But she was a little bit ahead of her time, and she had a boy who would sit on the front steps and listen in on the lessons. And she considered that okay until somebody from one of the school trustees said, you can't allow that to happen. You can't even teach him the alphabet. And so we can only speculate what happened after there, but they did tell her that she would lose her job if she continued to do so. So that's how it was back in the day. Miss Mary Holland Bell is buried not far from here. She's actually at the Flint Hill Cemetery right on 123, and on her tombstone it says misunderstood, and primarily because she felt it was her duty to educate all children, no matter whether black or white, and so that was her mission, and so at the time she was misunderstood. The schoolhouse is important to Oakton's identity because it's one of the few historic schoolhouses in Fairfax County. And it's also one of the few schoolhouses that we allow the public into, so there are even fewer of those. And I think the fact that we saved this schoolhouse speaks to how valuable education is in Oakton. Why it's important now is that my organization, the Greater Oakton Community Association, we want to bring 4th graders who are studying Virginia history in their schools into this classroom so they can see what it would be like to be a student in the 1900s. There's so much we want to do with the schoolhouse. I think right now we're working at making it a bit of a living history museum, or really a classroom is where we are. And so you can see from behind me, we've acquired a lot of school desks and chalkboards and display stands, and we've got the school bell and a picture of George Washington. And we really want it to be a classroom so that students can come and see what it was like in the 1900s, but we also want to use it for gathering, just like they did back in the 1900s when it was a school. We would love to see historians come here. We would love people to use it for birthday parties or events, and HOAs could come here. We see a lot of uses. We really want it to be integral to the community and a shared space for us all once again.
I was reading the history the other day, and tears came to my eyes because I was literally reading the history and having a cogent understanding of the impact that my grandfather had. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the residents now in this contemporary age, they are not familiar with the story of Luther Jackson. My grandfather was the president of the NAACP Fairfax County branch. So they were very instrumental in getting Luther Jackson started. because at that time, there was really no school for African Americans. There was, I think, 2 schools in DC. Imagine being transported from Northern Virginia to DC every day. And there was a school in Manassas. So they were very animate in getting a school started just for the African American community to make sure that they received a decent education.
We came to Luther Jackson in September of 1954. I was in the first graduating class. Of course, being the first class at Luther Jackson, we had the responsibility of setting the pace for all those that followed. We named the school, the football team, the Tigers. We had our own student association. We were instrumental in setting up the different classes, and the girls had a basketball team, and as well as the boys. So we did all of the athletic things that were in any other school.
With the sports, we had all the competitions by the time we got to the 60s, and we could go here and there, but we still were participating against the black schools. And then every now and then, we would participate against a white school, but mostly there were black schools. At Luther Jackson, we had government, and we had to learn the government, and we had to memorize the Constitution and memorize the preamble, and plus, in order to get out of government, we had to register to vote. So that was done. Also, we had driver's ed, and so that was really good because we could have a license once we came out of high school. Plus at Luther Jackson too, which is different today, is that when you graduated from Luther Jackson, you could go into the government as a GS2. And that's a blessing for those who are retired today because they raised up the ranks to 13s and 14s. And today, I don't think that's an offer for the kids to come out of high school and go into government if they didn't go to college or somewhere. Because of the Brown versus the Board of Education, when everyone back in '54 was supposed to be integrated schools and it wasn't forced, so in '65 it was forced all over the state of Virginia and all over. And so for me, I got to graduate from Luther Jackson, but the kids that were after, they're so mad because they didn't get to graduate from there because they were looking forward to it, because that was the school to be, because we had kids who were coming in from DC, coming in from Arlington, coming in from Alexandria, just to go to Luther Jackson.
My grandmother, Julia Shepard, who is the wife of my grandfather, Reverend Milton Shepard, was the very first PTA president for Luther Jackson from 1954 to 1955. And she played a very pivotal role in getting the community involved, getting the parents involved to make sure that Luther Jackson would be a success. In fact, when the school opened in 1954, Annandale High School also opened up. And the papers, the media did more coverage with Annandale versus Luther Jackson, go figure. Looking at my research, that it was a plethora of African Americans who really succeeded. Those who graduated from Luther Jackson, they were very successful. There were college professors, entrepreneurs, people who worked in the government, worked their way up. And so the success rate is very phenomenal.
They instilled in us that education was important, politics is important, voting is important, working is important. And it's still today, all of those things are important, but back then, because we didn't have what other people had, it was pushed.
One of the challenges, looking at my research and hearing from others, that it was a constant battle with W.T. Woodson, W.T. Woodson was the superintendent of Fairfax County Schools at the time in the 1950s. I recall I think it was a group of men, my grandfather, Reverend Milton Shepard, Reverend Roger Bush, Reverend Wallace Costner, J. Sidney Holland, and others, the Tenors, I think the Tenor brothers. They went to Fairfax County and said, hey, we need some funds for us. And the response they received was, we have to take care of our own first. So anyway, so those were the type of challenges. Now, keeping in mind, as I stated earlier, it was started they entered the school September 1st, 1954. This was, I think, 4 or 6 months after the Brown versus Board of Education, where they had the desegregation. And so this Luther Jackson, because my father graduated in 1959, and so I think the school became an intermediate school in 1964. So we're looking at roughly 10 years, I guess, of being a high school. Then the challenges were that the African American students had to attend the predominantly all white high schools, such as Annandale High School, Oakton High School, James Madison. And that was a challenge. And even though they encountered unfortunate circumstances, but at the same time, they knew how to rise above and make themselves successful. So yes, moving from an all black school to an all white school, sure, you're gonna have some challenges. Now, personally, I didn't encounter that because we're talking about, many years later. So, but I commend those individuals who overcame that.
When we go into Luther Jackson, I mean, all of that comes back. All the good times, all the educational things and so forth. So I'm just happy that it's still there as a middle school.
I think that as far as schools were concerned, the kids who were really, like their parents saw to it that they knew what to do and they were brilliant, and we had some brilliant kids. And so they were brilliant and they excelled regardless. And so I think that helped a lot. And then they had that determination and they had parents behind them. And this carried out through families. And so to a certain extent, it helped a lot because it was a challenge. And most of the kids in this area, they delighted in challenge. I think also it's not many of us left in the first class. And every time I go by there, I see and I can see the changes that have been made, how the building has grown. And I think that it's amazing the things that have happened and the changes that have taken place. It inspires me to know that we were the class that made the history. So it's good to know that we will, and it will go on for years because she has taught her children, and then her children will teach her children. So Luther Jackson will always be a name that will resonate in Fairfax County and in the state of Virginia because it was the first.
And what we're doing in the Alumni Association is having the kids that we gave scholarships to come in and learn what we're doing so that they can take over, because eventually we will all be gone.
Right.
And so they will still run the association.
Right.
So that's what we're doing with that.
In full circle, I am now pastoring a church across the street from where my grandfather started the school. In full circle. So therefore, I have an invested interest in the community of Maryfield.
We moved here in 1961. We came from Los Angeles, California, where I was born. And my mom wanted a contemporary house. They found one in Mantua. It was a bunch of young families with young kids moving in. It was a fabulous place to grow up. My mom had worked with the American Friends Center in Los Angeles, working with American Indians. And so when she came east, she decided to throw herself into the civil rights movement. So I'm sure she met Lillian Blackwell. at that point. And between Lillian, my mom, and whatever already civil rights movement was going on in Virginia with Lillian, they came up with the idea of starting Horizons Day Camp. And somehow they named my mother to be the director of the camp. And it was wonderful. Camp was at the United Church of Christ, I think is the name of it, on Route 236, across from the Nova Annandale campus. It's still there. And they were the only place that offered to have an interracial camp on their grounds. So the goal of the camp was to have kids play together and get past their parents' prejudice, get past the cultural baggage that they saw the other group as this strange other. And it worked. It worked for all, as far as I know, for all the kids that went. At least it worked for me. I loved the camp. But the thing that was lacking was access to a pool. And no pool in Fairfax County would allow blacks and whites to swim together. And so the YMCA is right up here on the corner from where I live. And they were like, no, no. So we had a pool. And my mom decided it was very important that kids have the opportunity to learn to swim when they're young. So they would have a line of parents, volunteers with their station wagons, pull up to camp at a certain time, and 5 kids or however many kids you could get in there, and they would drive to our house in the neighborhood, because it wasn't very far, 2 miles down the road, and go swimming in our little tiny swimming pool. As a result of the kids during camp time coming to our house for swimming, we used to get phone calls at dinner. And I remember distinctly, my mom, it was like, who would call it dinner time? No, everybody knew you didn't call it dinner time. And my mom would pick up the phone and she'd just listen. She never said anything. And she finally would say, I know who you are. And she'd hang up. And she never said a word because she didn't want to upset us. But years later, she told me that people would call and say nasty things about what she was doing with, and they used all the wrong words I'm not going to say now, but they said hateful things about what was happening at our house. And she told me later it was what neighbors it was, and it was like the mothers of some of my friends. I have always wondered what it was like for the children that went to the camp, because I only know myself and my other good friend. And I don't know of other people's feelings, how they grew and how that affected their outlook on the world. But I do know that when I started Mantua Elementary School, there were like no blacks in the school, like 2. And I'm thinking, well, what about all the kids that were just at this camp? I never did understand that. It took a long time till I grew up to figure out that our world was still keeping everything very segregated. The only trajectory between Horizons Day Camp, which is integration and kids having fun together and playing, and Mantua, I didn't see any integration. Then we got to Luther Jackson, and Luther Jackson had just desegregated. It had been the all-black 6th grade through 12th grade school. And all of a sudden, we were going to be bused there. And it was fine. The concept of busing was not in my world yet. So we went, and when we pulled in to where the bus is going to drop us off, there were, I thought, hundreds of students yelling and screaming and cheering. I thought, what a greeting. And they were yelling, we're black, you're black, we're all black at Luther Jack. And I remember thinking, woohoo! And we got off the bus. Like, it didn't occur to me that that was actually people trying to still claim their school. So I look back at that time when I moved here, and as a child, it was a county that was steeped in Virginia history. There's slavery, there's segregation, there's redlining, there's all the things that make it so blacks and whites lived in completely separate areas, and their paths didn't cross. Having that camp as a child gave me that message, and it was ingrained, and it just, that everybody's just a person. It doesn't matter what you look like, and I was so thankful to get that opportunity. Something that I value very much about Camp Horizons was that everybody who went, the children, the counselors, the people that drove the kids, everybody involved felt like they were in a very safe space. They were there doing something out of that they felt was essential for humans, and they were happy to do it, and there was such a loving vibe going on of enthusiasm and just sharing and getting to know people.
Both of my parents grew up without a lot of money, and their ticket to being able to give me the life that I had, and in turn the life that I was able to give my children, was all about the educational opportunities that they had. And it's that difference that FCPS makes, and the schools in Providence District made for me and for so many people like me, that made us able to come back and contribute to our community like this. I was very lucky to be able to go to Graham Road Elementary School. Graham Road Elementary School was really our community elementary school, and I started in the fall of 1977, barely a dozen years after the end of segregation here in Fairfax County. And by the time I was attending Graham Road Elementary School, it was one of the most diverse schools in the entire county. This idea of Graham Road and of the schools generally acting as, sort of the boots on the ground in responding to major societal changes, be it, the needs of an increasingly diverse community, the advent of something, like AIDS, for example, and how to ensure that, children who were afflicted with AIDS had the opportunity to have an education just like everybody else, to new technology, switching from having a typewriter lab to a computer lab, for example. Every step of the way, FCPS and the schools in Providence District, particularly Graham Road, led the way. One thing that has been a real joy for me in my current role as the Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development is the full circle nature of my work developing affordable housing and its connection not only to my personal history, but to the history of FCPS and education in Fairfax County.
As you have seen, education in Providence District has always been about more than classrooms. It's about community, resilience, and the people who believe in a better future for every child. From one-room schoolhouses to inclusive campuses, what's remained constant is our shared dedication to learning, to growth, and to one another. Thank you for watching. You can stay connected with me and my office at fairfaxcounty.gov/Providence. We'd love to hear from you.